Now, in the previous video, we talked about the assets panel, or you can call it a project sort of editor. Depends where you're coming from. In After Effects, you normally call the project panel. Then we're going to talk about the attributes editor, which is more of editing the characteristics of any shape, layer, behavior, or utility that you basically add in there. It's basically a broad thing, so we can't finish it in here, but I will be going through some of the things that you need to understand and what they basically mean. So I have these shapes which I've just created. You just need to press Alt or Option if you're using a Mac and just press Enter. You can create any sort of shape right in here. So as you can see, I've created the star and all those. So that's how I basically created all these. I just press, click on the tool and just, click inside there. Actually, you can just also click on the tool and just click anywhere to actually create that sort of object. So it's a very, very easy sort of a thing. So that's how I created all these ones. I just pressed on the tool and then clicked anywhere to, create that sort of a shape. So I have different sort of a shape, and there's the one which I named Zaza for some reason. It sounds like, a rapper's name or something like that. So anyway, here we have the attributes editor, which is more of editing characteristics. So I'm just going to click on any shape, and once I click on it, it shows its attributes. So I just have to double click on it and it will show the attributes in here, which is actually very important. Apparently we can search for any sort of attribute. For example, I'm looking for a deformer in here for all the shapes that I've actually added in there. So I can just type deformer and it will show us, the sort of deformers or the attributes of a deformer. I can just search for maybe filter, and then it will show us all the attributes that start with the filter or anything, division. It will show us anything. And I can also search for the layer. For example, the layer that I named Zaza, and it will appear at the top just like it was appearing apparently. So yeah, that's it to do with the attributes. You can enter any attributes name and it will show us in here, which is actually very important. And then here we have this one. It shows the maximum number of sort of panels, as we can call them. Think of this as a panel that can be shown in here. So I have over 5 layers. I created 5 because I wanted to show us that you can have the maximum. For example, if I click on the rectangle, it will just maybe replace some of the layers that we had in there, right? To make sure that there are only 4, right? Let me have removed them. As you can see, the more layers that I remove, it just basically decreases. If I add more, it will just literally increase. So that's the essence of that. So right here, we have something called the target. Once I enable it, it's just going to enable only the layer that I click on. For example, I click on the star shape, the arc shape. I just have to, click on it, a single click, and it will show its sort of attributes within the attributes editor, which sometimes is applicable, but I don't really advise it, right? Because of a feature called linking in After Effects, is called peak whipping. Here it's called making connections. So we should talk about what connections basically are, right? So instead of using the sort of the target sort of feature or the live mode, whatever you might want to call it, let me have like multiple layers. I can actually click on this next one, which is actually show selected. So it's basically more like showing the selected sort of tool, which works, for example, if I have like multiple ones and then I have only this selected, I can just basically show that which is selected, and it momentarily works like the target feature, right? But I can actually add more shapes in there. So that's what I really advise or would rather you prefer using instead. Here we have a button that basically clears them all. So once we click on it, basically just clears them all, irrespective of how many there are within the panel. So the best you can show within here are literally 4 panels, which is actually good for user experience, right? And you can just clear them all, right? So that's it to do with the attribute editor. I'm just going to maybe take the opportunity to go through just some of that. For example, these are more like shapes, and they have for example, the preview visibility in here. It's the same actually eye that you can actually disable or enable it using, either the timeline or the attributes editor. So you can enable and disable it. Here you can actually make it small or just literally reveal all the sort of options in there. I'm just going to keep it as simple as possible. So you have the places where you can edit the shape sort of attributes, which I'll go through them in a separate sort of tutorial. You can also edit the fill. Apparently, this has this particular field, so I can change it to anything else. You know, within in here, I can change the color to something different, and then there are all these sort of thingies. I can also add a shader more like the look and feel of how the things basically look. So I can add a shader, I can add a gradient shader and stuff like that, and then need to add gradient in there. I won't go through what shaders are, you know, in this sort of video tutorial. Then you can enable a stroke. I can just click on it and then just maybe click on a different color of a stroke and then enable stroke, and there are different sort of stroke settings that I can literally set for this sort of a shape layer. I can also add shaders in there. Then there's a place of adding a mask, and then advanced sort of settings, which I won't go through, right? So yeah, this is basically it, you know, the basics of the attributes editor. We shall go through this, or maybe I can just give us maybe 2 minutes of just going through this roughly. So we have this sort of Zaza layer, which is basically the polygon. And let me just disable the shaders. I'm just going to delete it. We can change the position from in here, you know, using this sort of a thingy, or you can actually do the same thing within the timeline. Although sometimes it can, you know, you can just drag it around and the position will basically change. So you can change the rotation. As I told you guys when I was starting this sort of video, when you rotate it into the positives, it rotates anti-clockwise. When you rotate it into the negatives, it rotates clockwise. Apparently it's still connected, so I can just remove a connection by clicking on this and then just removing it, right? So that's how basically we can remove a connection. We have the scale. The scale by default is not literally connected to, you know, or constrained in terms of proportion. So I can constrain it and I just have to scale one and they can all scale. There's also another way of, you know, doing that. I think by pressing option or something like that. Yes, when you press option, you can actually still scale them in both ways without necessarily having to link them, which is actually very nice. So you can skew. This is the same thing as in Illustrator or something like that in 1 dimension or 2 dimensions. The pivot is basically like the anchor point in After Effects. So you can change the pivot point, you know, and within the UI, basically it's the shape that basically moves, unlike in After Effects where the pivot point itself moves. And in here it's actually very important because the position of the layer is determined by where the anchor point is. For example, if I move this in this sort of a place, just like here, maybe at the 300 mark, right? As you can see, X is around 290 something. Let me just put it at 300, right? Once I put it on 300, you're going to see that on the X axis, just right here, once I drag the thing, where the 300 mark is where the anchor point basically is. So this is determined by where the pivot point or the anchor point basically is, right? Where the position basically is. So that's the essence of the pivot point. The pivot point is basically the place where all the transformation basically take place. Yeah. The opacity is the same thing, like everywhere you can increase or decrease the opacity. We have the blend modes, just like, you know, if you've used Photoshop or Illustrator or any sort of editor, blend modes are basically the same. Then we have something called deformers, right? Deformers, I will show you guys in different sort of examples what deformers are and how they behave. So you can add different sort of deformers. I would spare us the sort of mental energy, cognitive load. I won't talk about what deformers are. I've already talked about what filters basically are. They literally sort of add some sort of aesthetics or customization to the look and feel of different sort of objects. You can add the motion blur, you know, you can enable it to follow, you know, and then you can change. Now this primitive type, it's just literally something constrained to this sort of object. So you can change it to, you know, polygon, arc or something like that, ring, you know, so you can change it to anything else. Some of the shapes which are in here. So I can create another rectangle in here and it will show us different sort of attributes depending on the primitive type. All these are literally primitives. So depending on the primitive type, I can literally change it. And all these sort of editing sort of thingies are constrained or limited or attributed to what's to the kind of primitive that we've chosen in here. So I can increase the number of sides or decrease the number of sides. And as you've seen, different sort of thingies have different sort of primitives have different sort of settings. That's why I don't want to really talk about them all. But yeah, that's basically it to do with shapes and attributes. I'll see you guys in the next video.